I'm Benjamin. I'm 32 years old, and my heart stopped beating for 78 seconds on a cold, sterile operating table. While doctors fought to bring me back to life, my family, my mother, my father, my sister, was popping champagne bottles and posing for photographers at her high society gala. Before I tell you how a single, secret audio recording finally set me free and brought their world crashing down, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know I'm not just talking into the void. The first thing you notice when you're dying isn't a white light or a montage of your life. It's the sound. For me, it was the sound of a machine, a frantic, high-pitched beep that drilled directly into my consciousness. It was the soundtrack to my own personal apocalypse, the rhythm of my body giving up. My consciousness was a flickering candle in a hurricane. I was vaguely aware of a dull, throbbing fire in my abdomen, a stark contrast to the unnatural cold that had seeped into my limbs. I felt the strange, detached sensation of hands pressing on my chest, a rhythmic, violent pressure that felt like it was happening to someone else's body, a vessel I was merely observing. Through the thick fog of anesthesia and the encroaching darkness, a single, crystal-clear image burned itself into my mind's eye. It was more vivid than the chaotic reality of the operating room. It was an Instagram post. My sister, Olivia, had put it up just a few hours earlier. The whole family was there, gleaming under the lights of a grand ballroom. My father, Richard, stood with his chest puffed out in a rented tuxedo, the picture of success. My mother, Eleanor, was beside him, her smile as dazzling and structurally unsound as a diamond held together by glue. And in the center, bathed in the adoring flash of a professional camera, was Olivia, the golden child, the star of the evening at her charity gala, an event built on her vision, and funded, of course, by my salary and the business deals I had bled for. The caption beneath the photo was a masterpiece of fiction. It read, "Family is everything. I couldn't have done this without their endless support." Endless support. The words echoed in the screaming silence of the operating room as the steady beep of the machine monitoring my heart suddenly elongated into a single, piercing, unbroken tone. A flat line. The soundtrack had ended. For 78 seconds, I was nothing. A ghost in my own body, haunted by a photograph of a family that had forgotten I existed. But to understand why a son's heart would stop beating while his family celebrated, you have to understand the life that led up to that moment. You have to go back to the beginning of the end. For as long as I could remember, my life was defined by a simple, unspoken contract. My family created problems and I solved them. That was my role, my purpose. My father's company, Low Construction, was a monument to his ego and my ceaseless labor. It was a business in a perpetual state of managed decline, always one bad deal away from total collapse. I wasn't just an employee with the title of vice president. I was the company's full-time paramedic, running from one self-inflicted wound to the next, armed with spreadsheets and sleepless nights. My real job title should have been professional son and chief executive worrywart. The week my world fell apart was the culmination of this dynamic. We were on the verge of losing the Harrison contract, a city block-sized development deal so massive it would either secure our future for a decade or shutter our doors for good. For 2 straight weeks, I had subsisted on a diet of black coffee, stale donuts from the break room, and maybe 3 hours of sleep a night if I was lucky. I had personally re-engineered the entire proposal, discovered obscure zoning regulations that gave us an edge, and spent hours in excruciating meetings, charming old man Harrison's famously difficult board of directors. My father, meanwhile, spent his days practicing his golf swing and taking long lunches. "You've got this, Ben," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just keep your eye on the ball." He treated the company like a fantasy sports team he owned but never actually managed. The final meeting was a Shark Tank, and I was bleeding. It was held in the top-floor conference room of Harrison's skyscraper, a glass-walled box that made you feel like you were on top of the world, or about to be thrown from it. David Chun, a smarmy rival from a competing firm, was there, his grin predatory. He picked at every detail, questioned every projection, trying to poke holes in my work. "These labor cost estimates seem optimistic, don't they, Mr. Lowe?" he'd sneered, looking at Mr. Harrison, not me. I didn't flinch. They're based on the new union agreements finalized last quarter. David, I said calmly, sliding a copy across the table. Something your proposal seems to have overlooked, which would put your project about 12% over budget before you even break ground. For 3 hours, it went on like this. I was a machine, countering every argument, answering every question, and laying out a vision so clear, so profitable, that by the end of it, the room was silent. Mr. Harrison, a man built like a bulldog and with a smile to match, leaned back in his leather chair, which groaned in protest. He steepled his fingers and stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Impressive, son. Very impressive. You've got the deal. The wave of relief was so potent it almost buckled my knees. We did it. I did it. As we packed our briefcases, my father threw his arm around me, his voice booming for the benefit of the executives still in the room. That's my boy. Knew we had it in the bag all along. He absorbed the credit like a sponge, but in that moment of pure exhaustion, I almost didn't care. We had won. That's all that mattered. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the elevator, the city lights a blurry watercolor through my tired eyes. It was Olivia. I answered, a foolish flicker of hope in my chest that she was calling to say congratulations. Ben, I need you to transfer the money, she said, her voice a chipper command. No hello. No preamble. What money, Liv? I sighed, leaning my head against the cool metal wall of the elevator. The money for the gala, obviously. The final payment for the caterers. They need it by 5 o'clock, or they're going to charge a rush fee. The elevator doors opened, and I stumbled out into the lobby. Liv, I just spent 2 weeks of my life saving Dad's company. I'm running on fumes. And the word was a testament to her complete and total self-absorption. That's your job, isn't it? This is important. It's for my charity, Art for Underprivileged Youth. Think of the good press for the company. Dad said the business account is a little tight right now, so you need to use your personal savings. He'll pay you back. A hollow laugh almost escaped my lips. He'll pay you back. That was the oldest and most transparent lie in the Lowe family playbook. The business account was tight because I was the only one generating any real revenue, and my father and sister were the only ones spending it. Every major promotion, every salary increase I ever earned, wasn't for me. It was for the family's ever-expanding list of wants. Olivia, that's my house fund, I said, my voice strained. It's a lot of money. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. You can make more. You always do. Look, I have to go. My florist is on the other line. Just get it done, okay? Don't make this a thing. She hung up. I stood in the marble lobby, the bustling city life outside the glass doors feeling a world away. And like the good son, the responsible brother, the family fixer, I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app and stared at the number that represented years of careful saving, of skipped vacations and driving a 10-year-old car. My dream of a small house with a yard, a place of my own, was sitting in that account. I typed in the amount she needed. With a deep, shuddering breath, I hit confirm. As the confirmation screen flashed, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through my abdomen, so intense it made me gasp. I braced myself against a marble column, my knuckles white. I told myself it was just stress. It was just exhaustion. It was just the price of being the responsible one. I didn't know it then, but it wasn't stress. It was my body, finally presenting me with a bill I couldn't pay. The next 48 hours were a descent into a private hell of pain and paperwork. The Harrison contract, though won, needed to be finalized with a mountain of legal documents. My father, having taken his victory lap, was now completely checked out, leaving the intricate, tedious work entirely to me. The pain in my side had settled in for the long haul. What had started as a sharp, intermittent sting had now evolved into a deep, grinding ache that radiated through my entire torso. It was a constant, unwelcome companion, making it hard to sit, hard to stand, hard to breathe. I was popping antacids like candy, convinced it was a stress-induced ulcer. My best friend and colleague, Michael, was the only one who seemed to notice I was physically disintegrating. He caught me in the hallway, leaning heavily against the wall outside my office, my face pale and clammy with a sheen of cold sweat. "Ben, you look like death," he said, his usual easygoing smile replaced with a frown of genuine concern. "I'm not kidding. You need to go home. Go to an urgent care clinic. Something is wrong." "I can't," I gritted out, trying to force a reassuring smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just a few more documents to finalize. It's probably just a stomach bug." "A bug? Ben, you've been living at this desk for a month. You look like you've aged 10 years. Your body is sending you a message, and you're ignoring it. Go home." I appreciated his concern, I truly did. But the conditioning was too deep. My sense of duty was a disease. "After this last email," I promised, pushing myself off the wall. "It's the final presentation deck for the Harrison board. Once it's sent, I'm out of here. I promise." He shook his head, a look of frustration and pity in his eyes. He knew he couldn't stop me. Responsibility wasn't just my job. It was a cage I had meticulously built for myself, and I had long since convinced myself that the bars were there to protect everyone else. Back in the sterile quiet of my office, the world began to feel unstable. The bright lights of the ceiling seemed to pulse. The words on my computer screen swam in and out of focus, the letters blurring together into an incomprehensible script. The pain was no longer a background noise. It was a screaming crescendo, a fire licking up my ribs and stealing the air from my lungs. My hands trembled so violently that I had to steady my right hand with my left just to move the mouse. I knew on a primal level that this was more than a stomach bug. A terrified voice in the back of my mind was screaming at me to call 911, to lie down on the floor, to get help. This was a real, life-threatening emergency. But another voice, the one that had been cultivated and reinforced for 32 years, was louder. It was the voice of my father saying, "Don't be a complainer." It was the voice of my mother saying, "Don't make a scene." It was the voice of Olivia saying, "Don't be so dramatic. Finish the job. Don't let them down. Don't be a burden." The final presentation for the Harrison board. It was the last piece of the puzzle. My father had already left for the day, on his way to a final tuxedo fitting for the gala. He'd left it all to me, as he always did. With a final, agonizing surge of adrenaline, I clicked to attach the file. The progress bar seemed to move in slow motion. I typed in the names of the board members, my vision tunneling until the only thing in the entire universe was the bright white rectangle of the screen. My finger hovered over the send button, trembling. The pain was blinding now, a white-hot poker twisting in my gut. I slammed my finger down on the mouse. A small whoosh sound from my computer speakers confirmed the email was sent. It was done. The contract was secure. The company was safe. My job was done. And then the plush office carpet rushed up to meet me. The last thing I remember was the sharp corner of my mahogany desk connecting with my temple, a flash of white-hot pain, and then a profound, welcoming, and absolute blackness. I had given everything I had. And as I lay there, unconscious and bleeding internally on the floor of my empty office, my family was picking out their party clothes. They were getting ready to celebrate a victory I had won for them, completely unaware and completely uncaring that their most valuable asset had just crashed. I woke up to motion and the acrid smell of antiseptic. The world was a confusing smear of bright lights streaking overhead. A paramedic's face, calm and professional, hovered above me. "Hang in there, Benjamin. We're on our way. You're going to be okay." It was Michael who had found me. He'd had a gut feeling something was wrong when I didn't answer his text. He'd come back to the office to check on me, saw the light on under my door, and found me unconscious in a pool of my own sweat. He was the one who called the ambulance. He was the one who saved my life. My best friend. Not my father. Not my mother. Not my sister. The emergency room was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with urgent purpose, shouting a language I didn't understand. Internal bleeding, hypovolemic shock. BP is 80/50 and dropping. The pain was a living entity now, a monster with claws and teeth, tearing me apart from the inside. They hooked me up to IVs dripping clear fluid, monitors that beeped in a frantic rhythm, and an oxygen mask that felt like it was suffocating me. Through it all, one desperate, irrational thought consumed me. I had to call my parents. They would be worried sick. They needed to know what was happening. It was my duty to inform them. A kind-faced nurse with a weary smile and a name tag that read Grace saw the panic in my eyes. "Who do you need to call, honey?" she asked, her voice a small island of calm in the storm. "My mom, Eleanor," I rasped, my throat raw and dry. She found my phone in the plastic bag of my belongings and dialed the number, holding it to my ear. It rang, and rang, and rang. It went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Eleanor. I can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message, and I'll call you back as soon as I can." Her recorded voice was so cheerful, so full of life. Felt like a sick joke. "Try my dad, Richard." Grace dialed again. The same result. Ring, ring, voicemail. "You know what to do." Click. A cold dread, sharper and more terrifying than the physical pain, began to creep into my veins. They should have answered. It was early evening. They were getting ready for the gala. They weren't busy. "My sister," I pleaded with Grace, my voice cracking. "Olivia, please." Grace's expression was now one of growing concern, but she did as I asked. She dialed Olivia's number. This time, after 4 long rings, someone picked up. The sound of pop music and the cacophony of dozens of people talking and laughing blasted through the speaker. Party. The gala. She was already there. "Hello." Olivia's voice was bright, but laced with the distinct annoyance of someone being interrupted. "Liv? It's me?" I gasped, the effort of speaking sending a fresh wave of agony through me. There was a pause. I could hear her sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated exasperation that I knew so well. "Benjamin, seriously? Tonight of all nights? Can't you just handle it yourself for once? You're always so overdramatic." Overdramatic. The word was a bullet. It pierced through 32 years of devotion and shattered the illusion I had clung to for my entire life. I was lying in an emergency room bed, my body failing, my life hanging by a thread, and she thought I was putting on a show for attention. "Liv, please," I begged, the last of my strength, my dignity, draining away. "It's bad. I'm in the hospital. The doctors are saying I need surgery. Look, I really have to go." She cut me off, her voice as cold and sharp as glass. "The mayor just walked in, and I need to greet him. Just take some Tylenol or something. I'll deal with you later." Click. She hung up. She hung up on her dying brother to go mingle at a party. The phone slipped from Nurse Grace's hand, clattering onto the linoleum floor. Her face was a mask of utter disbelief and profound pity. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the reflection of my own shattering reality. I wasn't a son or a brother. I was an inconvenience. "We need to get him into surgery now," a doctor yelled from the doorway. As they wheeled my gurney down the brightly lit corridor toward the operating room, the cold, hard truth settled into my bones. No one was coming for me. I was completely and utterly alone. And as the anesthesia pulled me into its black embrace, my last conscious thought wasn't of my family's love, but of its chilling, absolute, and terrifying absence. Waking up from surgery felt like being resurrected into the wrong life. It was a slow, painful crawl out of a deep, dark pit. The first sensation was the coarse, starchy texture of the hospital blanket against my skin. The second was the rhythmic, steady beep of a heart monitor, a sound infinitely more comforting than the frantic screaming, and then the dead silence I remembered before. The third was the deep, surgical ache in my abdomen, a brutal, physical reminder of how close I had come to the edge. I blinked my eyes open, the dim light of the private room stinging them. The room was sterile, silent, and empty. For a foolish, desperate moment, a sliver of irrational hope pierced through the post-anesthetic fog. Maybe they were here. Maybe they were just down the hall, getting coffee from the machine. Maybe they had rushed here the moment they got a coherent message. their faces etched with regret and fear. Maybe they were waiting for me to be stable enough for visitors. My phone was on the bedside table, plugged into the wall. My hand, trembling with a weakness that felt profound, reached for it. The movement sent a sharp, tearing pain through my stitches, and I hissed. My thumb hovered over the home screen. Please, I thought, a desperate prayer to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please let there be a dozen missed calls. 100 frantic texts. Please let them have been worried. I unlocked it. The screen lit up, bright and clean and utterly, devastatingly empty. 0 missed calls. 0 new text messages. 0 voicemails. The silence of that screen was a physical force. Pressed in on me, crushing my chest, stealing the air from my lungs all over again. It was a deafening roar of indifference. My heart, the one the surgeons had worked so hard to restart just hours ago, felt like it was turning to a block of ice. My fingers, moving with a will of their own, numb and clumsy, opened Instagram. I don't know why I did it. It was a form of self-torture, a need to see the wound, to confirm the blade was still there. And there it was. The post was still at the top of my feed. My family, frozen in time, smiling their perfect, false smiles. But now there were more. I tapped Olivia's profile. A whole new album had been uploaded from the gala. There was Olivia, clinking champagne glasses with the mayor. There was my mother, laughing elegantly with some socialite whose name I couldn't remember. There was my father, posing proudly beside a large banner bearing the Low Construction logo, the company I had nearly died to save. I scrolled through the images, each one a fresh twist of the knife. They looked so happy, so carefree. They had uploaded these photos after Olivia had spoken to me, after she knew I was in the hospital. They had continued their night, documenting their joy, while I was unconscious on a table, my life in the hands of strangers. I read the caption under the main photo again. Family is everything. The words were no longer just ironic. They were a grotesque, malevolent lie, a mockery of every sacrifice I had ever made. The door to my room creaked open, and Nurse Grace walked in. Her kind, tired face was framed by the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. She saw me looking at the phone, saw the look in my eyes, and her professional smile faltered, replaced by a deep, human sympathy that was almost harder to bear than the indifference. "Good morning, Benjamin," she said softly. "It is so good to see you awake. You gave us all quite a scare last night." My throat was thick, and it took me a moment to find my voice. Did anyone call back?" I asked, the words coming out as a broken whisper. She hesitated, her gaze full of a pity I didn't want but desperately needed someone to feel. "I called all of your emergency contacts again this morning, Mr. Lowe. Several times. I left very explicit messages. I explained the 4-hour surgery, the internal bleeding. I told them your heart had stopped on the table." She took a deep breath, her own frustration evident. "No one has called back." There it was. The final, brutal confirmation. They knew I had almost died. And they still didn't call. They got the messages and chose to ignore them. They chose the party. They chose the illusion of a perfect family over the messy, inconvenient reality of their broken son. I turned the phone over, the screen going dark as if in mourning. The fragile hope I had clung to, the last vestige of the boy who just wanted his family's love, died a final, quiet death in that sterile, lonely room. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and they had chosen. I was nothing to them. Late that afternoon, my mother finally made her appearance. She didn't rush in, her face streaked with tears. She didn't fly to my bedside and grab my hand. She entered my hospital room the way one enters a slightly distasteful but necessary business meeting. Her expensive purse clutched in her hand like a briefcase, her expression one of carefully managed inconvenience. "Benjamin," she said, her voice crisp and cool. It was a statement, not a greeting. She didn't hug me. She didn't touch me. She stood at the foot of the bed, her sharp eyes scanning the room, the 4-stand, the heart monitor, as if assessing the quality of the facilities. "Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. There was no relief in seeing her, only a hollow echo of the love and expectation that used to reside there. "The gala was a tremendous success," she announced, as if she were reading a press release. It was her opening salvo, a clear declaration of her priorities. "Olivia was absolutely brilliant. The mayor himself said she has a real future in politics. We raised a significant amount for her little art charity." I stared at her, the silence stretching between us. I waited for the other shoe to drop. "How are you?" "We were so worried." "I'm so sorry we didn't answer. It never came." "I need the final paperwork for the Harrison deal," she said, getting straight to the point. Her tone was brisk, efficient. "Your father is in a complete panic. He says it needs to be messengered over to their legal team by 5 o'clock today. He can't make heads or tails of the subclauses you wrote in." The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. I had a foot-long incision held together by painful metal staples. My body was a war zone of recovery from massive trauma, and she was here for paperwork. "I almost died," I said. The words felt strange and heavy in my mouth, as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Grace, the nurse," she said. My heart stopped on the table for over a minute. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, a gesture so familiar it was practically a reflex for her. "Oh, don't be so melodramatic, Benjamin." The doctor explained everything. It was a minor complication during a routine procedure. "You're fine now. The important thing is to not fall behind on our commitments." Melodramatic, the same word Olivia had used. It was their family motto, their go-to acid to pour on any spark of genuine emotion I ever dared to show. My pain was an inconvenience. My near-death experience was an exaggeration. My trauma was a distraction from the family business. "I'm not fine," I said, and my voice had a new edge to it. It was quiet, but it was hard. "And I don't have the paperwork. It's on my laptop at the office." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a frown of annoyance. This was new territory. I had never said no to her before. I had never failed to provide. "Well, can't you call your assistant? That little girl, Sarah? Have her find it and send it. This is a multimillion-dollar deal, Benjamin. It's important. More important than your son." The words hung in the air between us, as clear as if I had screamed them. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't jump to solve her problem. I didn't reassure her that I would handle it. I didn't apologize for being incapacitated. I just lay there, silent, and looked at her, really looked at her. And in that silence, I saw her for what she truly was. Not a mother, but a CEO of a family enterprise. And I was her most reliable and most disposable asset. "I can't," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean you can't? Don't be difficult. This isn't the time for histrionics." I can't. I'm recovering from major surgery. I am in no condition to manage a contract negotiation from a hospital bed." She let out an exasperated sigh that was pure theater, pulling out her phone. "Fine. I'll deal with it myself, as usual." She turned to leave, then paused at the door as if remembering a final, crucial detail. "Oh, and Olivia will be forwarding you the invoice for the gala's after-party. Apparently, the corporate credit card was declined. Some issue with the account you manage. Make sure you handle that as soon as you get out of here. The venue is being very difficult about it." And then she was gone. She had come and gone without a single word of love, a single touch of comfort, a single sign that she saw me as anything more than a walking, talking ATM and a fixer of problems. The wall I had felt building inside me since I woke up was no longer brick and mortar. It felt like it was being forged from cold, hard steel. Something inside me had broken for good, shattered into a million pieces, and I knew with chilling certainty that it could never, ever be put back together again. The remaining days in the hospital passed in a haze of pain medication and quiet solitude. Michael was my only visitor. He brought me lukewarm coffee, trashy magazines, and the comforting normality of the outside world. He never once mentioned my family, and for that I was eternally grateful. He just sat with me, watching sports on the small TV, offering the easy, uncomplicated comfort of true friendship. He was more of a brother to me in those few days than my own sister had been in a lifetime. My family, after my mother's disastrous visit, reverted to their preferred method of communication, one-way digital demands. The texts were a masterclass in self-absorption. From Olivia, "Hey, did you get the invoice I sent? The venue is threatening late fees and it's making me look bad. Please handle." From my father, "Ben, Harrison's legal team has questions about the indemnity clause in Section 4B of the contract. You need to call them. I don't understand any of this jargon." I read each message, a fresh wave of cold fury washing over me, and then I deleted them without replying. Each ignored demand was a small act of rebellion, another steel plate being welded onto the fortress I was building around myself. On the day I was scheduled to be discharged, Nurse Grace came in with a clipboard stacked with papers. "Just a few more forms for you to sign, Benjamin, and you're free to go," she said with her usual warmth. I sat up in bed, wincing as the staples in my abdomen pulled at my skin, and took the pen. I sifted through the medical releases, the billing information, the post-op care instructions. And then I came to a page that made the blood in my veins run cold. It was the surgical consent form. The one you sign before they put you under, acknowledging the risks, up to and including death. It's the form that says you agree to let them cut you open to save your life. And there, at the bottom, on the line marked patient signature or legal next of kin, was a signature. It was my name, Benjamin Lowe, scrawled in a loopy, flamboyant handwriting, the B and L overly embellished in a way I had seen thousands of times on birthday cards and IOUs. It was Olivia's handwriting. The pen fell from my numb fingers. The clipboard clattered onto the thin hospital blanket. My heart, which had been beating so steadily, began to hammer against my ribs. "Grace," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a dry rasp. "When was this form signed?" She picked it up, her brow creasing with professional concern as she saw my face. "Let's see. It's all time-stamped. Here it is. It was signed at 7:15 p.m. on the night you were admitted. We couldn't proceed with the emergency surgery without consent, and you were unconscious. 7:15 p.m. The gala started at 7:30 p.m. Her big entrance was planned for 7:45 p.m. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. She had been here. Olivia hadn't just been at home, annoyed by my call. She had been at the hospital. They had called her as my next of kin, and she had shown up. A doctor, his face grave, would have stood in front of her and explained the life-threatening nature of my condition. They would have used words like critical, internal hemorrhage, chance of mortality. She stood right here, possibly in this very hallway, knew I was on the verge of death, and she signed a piece of paper, committed a felony by forging my name, and then she left. She left me to face my own death alone so she wouldn't be late for her party. The cold indifference on the phone had been brutal, but this was a calculated act of monstrous abandonment. She had physically been here, understood the stakes, and made a choice. She had weighed my life against her social event, against the inconvenience of staying, and my life had come up short. "Benjamin, are you all right? You've gone completely white," Grace said, her voice laced with alarm. I couldn't answer. I just stared at that forged signature, the ink and paper proof of the ultimate betrayal. My sister had stood at the crossroads of my life and death and had calmly, casually, chosen the path that led to champagne and applause. The deep, aching hurt I had been carrying for days curdled into something else entirely. Something cold, hard, and razor-sharp. It was a rage so pure and so profound it felt like a religious awakening. Clarified everything. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't just been neglectful. This was an active, conscious decision to discard me when I was at my most vulnerable. In that single, terrible moment, any lingering, sentimental hope for reconciliation, for an apology that could fix this, for a future where we could somehow be a family again, was utterly and permanently incinerated. It was over. I was done. The first call I made after stepping out of the hospital's automatic doors wasn't to my family to tell them I was home. It was to a woman named Margaret Shaw, the best and most ruthless family law attorney in the state. I wasn't getting a divorce from a spouse, but I was about to perform a kind of surgery myself. I was going to cut my family out of my life, meticulously and legally, until not even a scar remained. The weeks following my discharge from the hospital were a blur of quiet, methodical action. While my body was slowly healing, my mind was sharper and more focused than it had ever been. I was no longer operating on the chaotic fuel of emotion. I was operating on cold, hard strategy. I was building a fortress around my life, brick by legal brick, and I was going to make damn sure my family couldn't find a single crack to slip through. My first meeting was with Margaret Shaw. She wasn't what I expected. She was a petite woman in her late 50s with a warm smile, but her eyes were like steel traps. They didn't miss a thing. I sat in her plush office, overlooking the city, and laid out the entire story. I started with the years of financial dependency, the saved emails, the bank transfers. I moved on to the night of the surgery, the ignored calls, my mother's visit. And I finished by placing a clear photo of the forged consent form on her polished mahogany desk. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I presented the facts with the detached precision of an auditor presenting their findings. She listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, she picked up the photo of the signature and examined it for a long moment. Then she looked at me and nodded slowly. "All right, Benjamin. This is more than a simple family dispute. This is a pattern of severe financial and emotional abuse, culminating in criminal fraud and reckless endangerment." Her words were a balm, a validation of everything I had been feeling. "We have more than enough to work with. First things first, we cauterize the financial wounds. We lock down your assets, and we do it today." That afternoon, I walked into a new bank where my family had no history. The feeling of opening an account that was solely mine, with no joint holders or authorized users, was intoxicating. It was the first breath of free air. I arranged for my entire salary to be redirected there. Then came the tedious but deeply satisfying work of dismantling the web they had woven around my finances. The joint credit card my mother used for emergencies, which usually meant a new pair of shoes or a spa day, was canceled. The family cell phone plan that I had been paying for since I got my first job was terminated. I got a new number and a new phone, leaving their lines to be suspended. My next step was changing my legal documents. I went to a notary and signed a new durable power of attorney and a healthcare proxy, naming Michael as my agent in both. The thought that, had I been incapacitated for longer, my mother or father would have been making medical decisions for me was terrifying. I was erasing them from my life, one legal line at a time. I even updated my will, ensuring my entire estate would go to Michael and a few charities, with a specific clause explicitly disinheriting my parents and sister. Then, as expected, the calls and texts began. They started as confused, then quickly escalated to demanding and finally to outright abusive. "Olivia, my card was just declined at Nordstrom." "What the hell, Ben? This is so embarrassing. Fix it." "My father. The office said you're on medical leave until further notice. When are you back? These projects are a mess. We're rudderless here." "My mother. Benjamin, I have left you 4 voicemails. I expect you to call me back immediately. This childish behavior is unacceptable and will have consequences." I read each message with a strange sense of detachment, like a scientist observing a predictable reaction in a petri dish. Then I blocked their numbers one by one. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. While they were fuming, Margaret and I were digging. She hired a forensic accountant, a quiet man named Arthur, to conduct a deep dive into my finances, specifically any accounts or transactions that had ever been linked to my parents. "With people like this," Margaret had said, her voice grim, "the greed is rarely limited to one area. It's usually a systemic rot." At Margaret's recommendation, I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jonathan Reed. He was a quiet, thoughtful man with a beard that made him look like a philosophy professor. He helped me unpack 32 years of ingrained conditioning, the deep-seated belief that my only value lay in my utility to others. You weren't their son, Benjamin, he told me during one particularly difficult session. You were their function, their safety net, their financial planner, their emotional punching bag. When the net was removed, they didn't worry about the net's well-being. They just worried about their long, hard fall. It was a harsh, brutal truth, but it was also liberating. With every legal document I signed, every therapy session I attended, I felt another one of their chains breaking. I was taking back control. I was building my fortress, and for the first time in my life I felt safe inside. About a month into my new, fortified life, Margaret called me into her office. Her tone on the phone was different. It lacked its usual briskness, replaced by something more somber. Benjamin, Arthur finished his report. I think you need to come in and see this in person. A knot of cold dread tightened in my stomach. I thought I had uncovered the worst of it. The forged signature, the years of financial bleeding. What else could there be? I sat across from her polished desk, the skyline of the city a placid, indifferent backdrop. A thick, spiral-bound report lay between us. It looked like an autopsy. What is it, Margaret? I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. It's about the trust fund your maternal grandmother, Helen, left for you, she said, sliding the report across the desk. Her eyes were full of a soft, professional sympathy. She set it up when you were born. A very forward-thinking woman. It was an irrevocable trust, meant to be completely inaccessible to anyone, including you until your 35th birthday. It was her inheritance to you. I remembered my grandmother. She was a warm, witty woman who smelled of lavender and always slipped me a $20 bill when my parents weren't looking. She always knew, she'd whisper with a wink. She passed away when I was in college. The trust was her final gift, a secret nest egg she had built to give me a fair start in life, free from my parents' influence. According to the initial investment and the market performance over the last 3 decades, Margaret continued, tapping a highlighted chart in the report, the trust should have a current value of approximately $500,000. She paused, letting the number hang in the air. Then she delivered the blow. Benjamin, it's empty. In fact, it's been systematically drained. The final withdrawal was made 3 years ago. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. Empty? That's not possible. You said it was irrevocable. It was locked. It was, she confirmed, her expression grim. But even irrevocable trusts have clauses for emergency distributions for the beneficiary's welfare. These are intended for dire circumstances, life-saving medical bills, preventing homelessness, that sort of thing. To access the funds, the trustees, in this case your parents, had to petition the probate court, proving you were in dire need. She pushed another folder toward me. It was filled with copies of court petitions, one filed every 6 months for nearly a decade. My mother's elegant signature was on every single one. The reasons cited for the emergency withdrawals were a sickening work of fiction. Emergency tuition payments for Benjamin's graduate degree at Harvard. I never even applied to grad school. Substantial medical expenses for Benjamin's chronic autoimmune condition. I hadn't had so much as a cavity in 10 years. Down payment for Benjamin's first home to establish his independence. I was, and still am, renting a 1-bedroom apartment. They had used a legal loophole to systematically plunder my inheritance. My grandmother's final act of love and protection, the one thing that was meant to be mine and mine alone, had been stolen and squandered. They had liquidated my future to pay for their present. I stared at the papers, the black and white letters blurring into a gray haze of utter betrayal. This wasn't just about money. This was a desecration of a memory. They had taken my grandmother's love for me and twisted it into a tool for their own greed. There's one more thing, Margaret said softly, her voice pulling me back from the abyss. She pointed to the last page of the report. The final and largest withdrawal was for $150,000. The reason listed. She looked down at the paper, her voice laced with contempt. To provide capital for a secure real estate investment on behalf of the beneficiary. She looked back up at me, her eyes hard as diamonds. It was used as the down payment on the beach house in the Hamptons. The one they spend every summer at. The beach house. The place they flaunted on social media. The backdrop for their perfect family photos. The ultimate symbol of their success. It was all a lie. It was all bought with my stolen money. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, obliterating any remaining sentiment. This was not a family. This was a long con. A criminal enterprise with a 32-year history. And I had been their mark from the day I was born. Any lingering doubt, any shred of childish hope for a different reality, was incinerated in the fire of that revelation. This was no longer just about cutting them off. This was about justice. With their financial lifelines severed and their calls and texts going into a digital black hole, my family grew desperate. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and their next move was as predictable as it was shameless. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. I just never imagined it would be so spectacularly public. I had returned to work on a limited, part-time basis, mostly to oversee the transition of my projects to other managers. The atmosphere at the office was thick with unspoken tension. Michael had warned me that my father had been stomping around like a caged bear, his usual veneer of detached bonhomie replaced with a sour, panicked anger. Several smaller projects were already floundering without my constant intervention. They chose a Tuesday afternoon. It was the worst possible time for them, and the best possible time for me. I was in the main glass-walled conference room, which sat in the center of the open-plan office like a fishbowl. Inside with me was Mr. Harrison himself and two of his top executives. We weren't just having a meeting. We were discussing the final details of a new venture he wanted me to lead personally. A new, independent division funded directly by his firm, completely separate from low construction. It was my escape hatch. Suddenly, the main doors to the office burst open with a crash, and all heads turned. It was my mother, father, and Olivia, a united front of manufactured outrage, storming in like a tactical team. My father's face was beet red with fury. My mother's was a carefully constructed mask of tragic grievance, and Olivia looked like she was ready to physically claw my eyes out. "Benjamin!" my father boomed, his voice echoing through the normally quiet office. 100 conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. The entire company was now an audience. "We need to talk. Now." I stood up slowly from the conference table, my movements deliberate and calm. Inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But on the outside, I projected an aura of pure ice. Mr. Harrison, a man who had seen everything in his 60 years of business, simply raised an eyebrow, looking from me to the unfolding spectacle with undisguised curiosity. "I'm in a meeting," I said, my voice even and steady, carrying easily through the silent room. "This is more important than any meeting," my mother snapped, striding forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished concrete floor. Her voice dripped with melodrama, pitched perfectly for the benefit of the surrounding employees. "We've been worried sick about you. You won't answer our calls, you won't answer our texts. It's like you've fallen off the face of the earth after everything we've done for you." Olivia, right on cue, chimed in, her voice shrill and piercing. "Your credit cards are canceled. Your phone is disconnected. What is wrong with you? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have your card declined in front of everyone at Saks?" The sheer, breathtaking narcissism of that statement hung in the air. I had almost died, and her primary concern was a moment of social inconvenience. I just stood there, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair, and let them perform. I let everyone in that office see them for exactly what they were. My rival, David Chun, was leaning back in his chair with a bucket of imaginary popcorn, a smug grin plastered on his face, savoring my public humiliation. "This is a family matter," my father interjected, trying to sound authoritative but just sounding blustering and desperate. "It's about loyalty. It's about respect for your father." He gestured expansively around the office. I built this company for you, for our family, and this is how you repay me." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. He hadn't built it. He had inherited it and had been slowly driving it into the ground ever since. I was the one who had kept it from crumbling into dust. My mother took another step closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was still loud enough for everyone in the first 3 rows to hear. "We love you, Benjamin. We are your family. Whatever is going on, we can fix it. But you can't just throw us away. After your surgery, we were just trying to give you the space you needed to heal." It was the most pathetic, transparent, and insulting lie I had ever heard. And it was the perfect opening. I didn't say a word. I simply held up a single hand, a quiet gesture asking for a moment of silence. Then I pulled my new phone from my pocket. The room fell completely silent, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Everyone was waiting to see what I would do. My family looked confused, their script momentarily forgotten. Mr. Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his expression one of rapt attention. This was no longer just a messy family drama. This was a corporate coup, a public execution, and he had a front-row seat. The fate of my future, my promotion, and my very sanity was being decided in this fishbowl. As my family stood there, caught in the headlights of 100 curious stares, their momentum broken by my silence, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the sender's name. It was Lucas, Olivia's ex-fiancé. He was a decent, kind man who she had unceremoniously dumped a year ago after his tech startup failed, deeming him no longer a suitable accessory. We had remained friendly, in a quiet, distant way. The text was simple and devastating. "I heard they were heading to your office. They're telling people you've had a mental breakdown. I can't let them do that to you. You deserve to know the truth. All of it." Attached was an audio file. My hands were surprisingly steady as I tapped to download it. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty that transcended logic, that this was the final piece of the puzzle. This was the weapon I hadn't even known I was waiting for. This was the end of the story they had been writing for me my entire life. My mother, Eleanor, saw me looking at my phone and her patience finally snapped. The mask of the grieving matriarch fell away, revealing the shrew beneath. "Are you even listening to me, Benjamin? Or is your telephone more important than your own mother's broken heart?" I looked up from the screen, my eyes locking with hers across the conference table. And for the first time, she didn't see her compliant, guilt-ridden son. She saw a stranger. She saw a judge. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, clear, and carrying through the unnaturally silent office, "I think everyone here should listen to this. It's a matter of family history." Before anyone could react, before my father could bluster or Olivia could shriek, I connected my phone to the conference room's Bluetooth speaker system with a single tap. I pressed play, and I turned the volume all the way up. A woman's voice, amplified and crystal clear, filled the entire floor. It was my mother's voice, but not the carefully modulated, socially acceptable one she used in public. This was her private voice, raw and unguarded, dripping with the casual venom she reserved for her closest confidants after a few glasses of Chardonnay. She was on the phone with someone, a friend, likely recorded by accident as a pocket dial voicemail on Lucas's phone when he and Olivia were still together. "I'm just so tired of it, Brenda." My mother's recorded voice crackled from the ceiling speakers, always having to prop him up, pretend he's the golden boy when we all know Olivia is the real star. "It's exhausting." The friend's voice murmured something indistinct, a soft question, and then came the killing blow, the words that would reframe my entire existence. "Honestly?" My mother's voice continued, sharp and cruel as a shard of glass. "Benjamin wasn't supposed to happen. You know that. He was a mistake, an accident that threatened to derail Richard's career path. The only reason we kept him was because Richard was terrified of how a termination would look to his conservative board members back then. Bad for his image, bad for the business. So we had him. And ever since that day, it has been one long, expensive, and emotionally draining responsibility. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, a black hole that sucked all the air, all the sound, all the life out of the room. It was the sound of 100 people holding their breath at once. I watched my mother's face. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, horrified mask of slack-jawed disbelief. My father stared at the speaker on the ceiling as if it were an alien spacecraft, his mouth hanging open in a perfect O of horror. Olivia, for the first time in her life, looked utterly and completely broken, as if the foundation of her own privileged world had just been vaporized. Every eye in the office was on them. The whispers, the pretense, the carefully constructed facade of the perfect, powerful family. All of it had been stripped away, burned to the ground by the raw, ugly truth of that recording. Mr. Harrison slowly sat back in his chair, his face a grim, stony mask of utter disgust. He looked at my parents not as business associates, but as something vile he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. David Chen's smug grin had vanished, replaced by a look of genuine, slack-jawed shock. The recording ended. The silence stretched on, thick, suffocating, and damning. I looked at the three people who had been the sun, moon, and stars of my universe for my entire life. They were strangers, worse than strangers. They were my architects, and they had knowingly, deliberately, built my entire life on a foundation of lies, resentment, and a cold business calculation. I disconnected the Bluetooth connection with a flick of my thumb. I slid my phone back into my pocket. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to utter a single word of accusation. The truth, in my mother's own voice, had done all the talking for me. I turned back to Mr. Harrison and the stunned executives at the table. I sincerely apologize for the interruption. Now, about the Q3 budget projections for the new venture. But before I could continue, I paused. I looked back one last time at my family, at the smoldering wreckage of their public personas. And in a voice that was quiet, but full of the weight of 78 seconds of clinical death and a lifetime of emotional neglect, I said the only thing that was left to say. Now you know. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for sticking with me this far, you're amazing. If you could do me a huge favor and like this video and comment with a 1 down below, it lets me know you've been on this journey with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also shows me that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest reason I have the strength to keep sharing the rest of my journey. There was no grand explosion, no shouting match, no dramatic climax you see in the movies. There was just a slow, humiliating retreat. My family, exposed and shamed in front of the world that mattered most to them, simply turned and walked out of the office. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at anyone. They just fled, their heads bowed, leaving their dignity and their power scattered on the corporate carpeting behind them. It wasn't a bang. It was a whimper. The moment the doors hissed shut behind them, the office erupted in a low, shocked murmur. I felt dozens of pairs of eyes on me, but the gaze was different now. It wasn't pity. It was a strange, sober kind of respect. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning over, and it immediately brought the room back to a stunned silence. He looked at me, his expression serious, the earlier curiosity replaced by a grim resolve. "Son," he said, and the word carried a paternal weight it never had from my own father. "No one should ever have to endure that. I am profoundly sorry that you did." He stood up, walked around the table, and placed a firm, heavy hand on my shoulder. "I think it's crystal clear that your talents and your character are being wasted in this environment. The new venture we were discussing, the offer is no longer a partnership. The division is yours. I'm making you president of Harrison Innovations, effective immediately. We'll set you up with your own office space, your own team. Whatever you need, the budget is yours to command. Consider this your declaration of independence." It was more than a job offer. It was a life raft. It was a validation of my worth as a man, as a professional that had nothing to do with my last name. It was a future, handed to me in the smoking crater of my past. "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I accept." The fallout from that day was swift and merciless. News of the public implosion, fueled by 100 eyewitness accounts from the office, spread like wildfire through our city's tight-knit social and business circles. The story of the audio recording became an instant cautionary legend. My parents, who had built their entire identity around their public image and social standing, were suddenly radioactive. Old friends stopped returning their calls. Long-standing invitations to charity balls and social events were quietly rescinded. Business partners, who had once tolerated Richard's incompetence because of my competence, suddenly became wary of being associated with the Lowe family name. Within 2 months, Lowe Construction, the company my father was so proud of, the company I had sacrificed my health and my inheritance to keep afloat, declared bankruptcy. It turned out that, without my constant deal-making and damage control, the entire enterprise was a house of cards. They lost everything. The sprawling house in the suburbs, the luxury cars, the country club membership that was the centerpiece of their social life. It all evaporated, revealing the hollow, debt-ridden reality they had been hiding for years. They had been living on my salary, my stolen trust fund, and a mountain of credit. Now that the Bank of Benjamin was closed for good, their empire crumbled to dust. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a sense of revenge. I just felt a quiet, somber sense of finality. It wasn't something I had done to them. It was just gravity. They had been in freefall for years, and I had finally let go. One rainy evening a few weeks after I had moved into my new, spacious office at Harrison Innovations, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I had become fiercely protective of my new, peaceful life. But some lingering instinct made me swipe to accept. Hello, Benjamin. The voice was weak, raspy, almost unrecognizable. It was my father. I was silent for a long moment, surprised by the profound lack of emotion I felt. There was no anger, no hatred, no pity. There was just a vast, empty space where a lifetime of complicated feelings used to be. It was the emotional equivalent of a cleared-out, empty lot. What do you want, Richard? I asked. Using his first name felt natural now. He was no longer Dad. He was just a man I used to know. He started to sob. It wasn't the booming, angry cry of a patriarch who had been wronged. It was the thin, pathetic whimper of a defeated old man. I had a stroke, Ben. The stress of the bankruptcy. It was too much. The doctors say, it's not good. I'm at the county hospital. An old reflex, a ghost of a habit, flickered inside me. The urge to fix, to help, to take on the burden. For a split second, a programmed pang of guilt shot through me. This was the ultimate test. I'm in a shared room, he continued, his voice thick with self-pity and a new, unfamiliar humility. The food is terrible. Your mother is a mess. She can't handle any of this. Olivia, she's lost. She had to get a job as a hostess. We have nothing, son. We've lost everything. We need you. We need you. The 4 words that had been the bars of my cage for 32 years. But they sounded different now. They sounded hollow, transparently manipulative. He wasn't asking for his son. He was calling his fixer. He was trying to activate the old programming. But the old programming had been deleted. I thought about the 78 seconds my heart had stopped. I thought about the deafening silence of my phone in that empty hospital room. I thought about the loopy, false signature on a legal document. I thought about the court petitions that had stolen my grandmother's legacy. I thought about the cold, cruel voice on the recording, dismissing my entire life as an inconvenient mistake. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was the heaviest, most solid thing I had ever built. It was a wall. It was a fortress. It was a final, unbreakable boundary. What? He stammered, shocked into silence. He had expected me to fold. He had always folded. No, I repeated, my voice calm and certain. The son you needed, the one who would have dropped everything to come running, the one who would have paid for a private room and the best doctors. He's gone. He bled out on that operating table while you were at a party. You're talking to someone else now. And he's busy. I could hear my mother in the background, her shrill voice cutting through the phone. What did he say? Is he coming? Tell him he has to help us. He has a moral obligation. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs feeling clean and new. Goodbye, Richard. and I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just ended the call. Then I blocked the number. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. It was the final, definitive brick in the wall of my new life, sealing the past away for good. I had finally drawn a line, not in the sand, but in solid stone. On one side was them with their chaos, their manipulations, and their lies. And on the other side was me, finally, blessedly, and completely free. A year can change everything. Can feel like a decade or a single breath. For me, it was both. 12 months after that final, liberating phone call, I found myself standing on a pristine white sand beach in Thailand. The sun a warm, benevolent weight on my skin. The turquoise water of the Andaman Sea lapped gently at my feet, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt a sense of profound and absolute peace. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my existence for as long as I could remember was finally gone. In its place was a quiet, steady calm. The presidency of Harrison Innovations had been a whirlwind of success. Freed from the dead weight of my family's incompetence, I thrived. I discovered I had a talent not just for fixing problems, but for building things from the ground up, for inspiring a team, for creating instead of just managing decline. I was respected for my mind and my vision, not for my last name or my utility. My new, substantial salary wasn't being siphoned off to fund a lifestyle of illusion. It was mine. It was building a new life, a real one. But the biggest change wasn't professional. It was personal. I had picked up my old camera again, a serious passion I'd abandoned in college because my father had called it a frivolous waste of time. The camera became my constant companion, a tool that taught me how to see the world differently, to find beauty and meaning in the small, quiet moments that my old life had never allowed me to notice. Michael and I had taken this trip to Thailand together, a celebration of what he had dubbed my one-year freedom anniversary. We spent our days exploring ancient, vine-choked temples and our nights sitting on plastic stools at bustling street markets, eating spicy noodles and drinking cold beer, talking about everything and nothing. It was easy. It was real. I rarely thought of my family. Occasionally, a piece of news would trickle through a distant relative who hadn't yet been informed of my excommunication. I heard they had been forced to move into a small, run-down apartment complex in a less-than-desirable part of town. I heard Olivia was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant, her socialite friends having long since abandoned her to her new, unglamorous reality. I heard my father's health had stabilized, his stroke having been, as it turned out, relatively minor. It all felt like a story about people I had once read about in a novel. One morning, while sitting on the balcony of my bungalow overlooking the sea, I was scrolling through old emails, doing a digital spring cleaning. I came across one from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, sent a few months prior. I had never opened it. The subject line was simply, "Thinking of you." My finger hovered over the delete button, but a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain made me tap it open. It was a long, rambling, multi-page screed, a masterwork of passive-aggressive guilt trips disguised as loving concern. She talked about the importance of forgiveness, the unbreakable sanctity of the family bond, how my mother was wasting away from a broken heart and had lost her spark. She painted a picture of their bleak new life, subtly implying that it was my responsibility to fix it. The email culminated in a truly breathtaking display of emotional blackmail. "Your father's funeral might be the next time we are all in a room together. Is that really what you want on your conscience for the rest of your life?" A year ago, that email would have destroyed me. It would have sent me into a dark spiral of guilt, obligation, and self-doubt. It would have worked. Now, I read the words with a calm, analytical detachment. I saw the cheap tactics, the transparent manipulations, the desperate, clumsy attempt to reactivate my old programming. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of pity for a woman so trapped in her own toxic worldview that she couldn't see how grotesque her words were. I took a sip of my strong Thai coffee. I looked out at the vast, peaceful ocean. Then I looked back at the email. My finger moved with steady purpose over the screen. I tapped delete. I felt no hesitation, no regret. just a quiet sense of relief. The sun was rising, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was a new day, and it was all mine. When I returned to the States, I felt like a different person. The trip had been more than a vacation. It was a pilgrimage. It had solidified my resolve and given me a new sense of purpose that had nothing to do with boardrooms or balance sheets. I decided to combine my new life with my old passion. I rented a small, chic gallery space in the Arts District downtown and curated my first solo photography exhibition. I called it 78 Seconds. It wasn't a literal, documentary-style retelling of what had happened. It was an abstract, emotional journey told through images. The early photos in the exhibition were dark, chaotic, and claustrophobic. Blurry city lights seen through a rain-streaked window, the cold, menacing gleam of stainless steel instruments, the oppressive emptiness of a sterile room. Then, as you walked through the gallery, the tone of the photos gradually, subtly began to shift. There was a shot of a single, impossibly resilient flower growing through a crack in a concrete sidewalk. There was a sweeping, majestic landscape at dawn, the fog slowly lifting. There were warm, intimate portraits of true friends, their faces filled with genuine laughter. The final photo in the exhibition was a self-portrait, but it was unconventional. It only showed my chest, from my collarbones to my sternum. The faint, silvery line of my surgical scar was barely visible. But over the image, a German artist I collaborated with had created a stunning visual effect. A soft, pulsing wave of light, a gentle, rhythmic sine wave, that mimicked the exact pattern of a healthy, steady heartbeat. It was a picture of peace, of survival, of life. Opening night was more than I could have ever hoped for. The gallery was packed. Friends, colleagues, and even Mr. Harrison came to support me, his presence a quiet, powerful endorsement. I was overwhelmed with a sense of community and belonging I had never known before. I was in the middle of explaining the symbolism of the flower photo to a group of interested patrons when the crowd near the entrance parted, a sudden hush falling over the immediate area. And there they were, my mother, father, and Olivia. They looked like ghosts from a past life. They were diminished, faded copies of the powerful figures I remembered. My father was leaning heavily on a cane, though he walked with a theatrical limp that seemed slightly exaggerated, a performance of frailty. My mother's expensive designer clothes were gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting dress that hung on her thin frame. Olivia's face was bare of its usual mask of makeup, her eyes wide and pleading. They looked completely out of place in the vibrant, creative atmosphere of the gallery. They made a beeline for me, ignoring the curious and hostile stares from my friends. "Benjamin," my mother whispered, her voice cracking with an emotion that might have even been genuine. "This exhibition, it's just beautiful. We are so proud of you. We always knew you had this talent in you," my father added, reaching a shaky, liver-spotted hand toward my arm. I took a half step back, a reflexive, unconscious movement, and his hand fell back to his side. "We made a mistake, Ben," Olivia said, tears welling in her eyes, her voice trembling. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake. We were wrong. We were so wrong. Dad's stroke. It's getting worse. He needs his son. Please." The air was thick with the stench of their desperation. They were putting on one last, grand performance, right here in the center of my triumph, trying to reclaim their role in my story. Just as I was steeling myself to respond, to deliver the final, quiet refusal, a familiar face appeared over my mother's shoulder. It was Lucas, Olivia's ex-fiancé. He gave me a small, tight nod, a gesture of solidarity. He'd come to support me, and his timing was impeccable. He looked past me and smiled politely at my father. "That's a nasty stroke you're recovering from, Mr. Lowe," Lucas said, his voice casual but carrying a sharp, clinical edge. "It's a miracle you're walking so well. My uncle, the chief of neurology at Johns Hopkins, had a patient with a massive cerebral hemorrhage last year, and he's still completely paralyzed on his left side. Yours must have been one of those minor transient ischemic attacks. Tia. Very scary, of course, but usually no lasting damage, right? A full recovery is almost always the prognosis." My father's face went blank. The theatrical limp vanished. He had been caught. Lucas, whose uncle was indeed a world-renowned neurologist, had just called their bluff in the most elegant, devastating way possible. Their final, desperate lie, the severity of my father's condition, had been exposed as just another cheap, manipulative tactic. It was the last, pathetic card they had to play, and it had just been revealed as a joker. I looked at them, at the three architects of my pain, and for the first time I didn't see monsters. I just saw weak, hollow, pathetic people, stripped of their power, their money, and finally, their lies. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. The incandescent rage had burned out long ago, leaving behind the cool, calm, and unbreakable certainty of the truth. There were no more games to be played. I looked past my family, at my own photograph on the gallery wall behind them, the final piece, the one with the steady, pulsing light of my heartbeat. My new life, my steady pulse, my peace. The sun you could manipulate, I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the gallery's low buzz. Everyone around us fell silent, listening. The brother you could exploit, the man who would set himself on fire to keep you warm. He bled out on that operating table. He died in that lonely hospital room a year ago. I met each of their gazes one by one. My mother's, filled with a horrified, dawning comprehension. My father's, with a flicker of what looked like genuine shame before it was extinguished by defiance. Olivia's, with the vacant look of utter defeat. The man who came back, I continued, my voice steady and strong. The one who survived those 78 seconds. He doesn't need your approval anymore. He doesn't need your validation. And he doesn't need your permission to be happy. I paused, letting the words settle in the silent space between us. This exhibition is the end of this story. My story. You are no longer a part of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have guests to attend to. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I simply turned my back on them. A simple act that felt more powerful than any argument I could ever make. I walked away, back into the warm, welcoming crowd of people who were there to celebrate me, not to use me. Michael came to my side instantly, clapping me firmly on the shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. Mr. Harrison gave me a proud, fatherly nod from across the room. I was surrounded not by the family I was born into, but by the family I had built. The family I had chosen. I never saw or spoke to them again. My freedom wasn't loud or vengeful or dramatic. It was a quiet, steady rhythm, like the gentle, pulsing light in a photograph. It was the beating of a healthy heart. My heart, beating strongly, marking the time of my new life. 1 second at a time. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's not easy to share these parts of our lives, but I truly believe in the power of telling our truths. Have you ever had to make a difficult, life-altering choice to protect your own peace and well-being? I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts or your own story in the comments below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. It means the world to me.